What makes a news source trustworthy? For 137 years, the Financial Times has answered that question with fearless reporting, expertise in global affairs, and editorial independence. FT journalists deliver the analysis and insights that shape boardroom decisions and policy debates alike. So when the world feels complex, turn to a source that's built its name on courage and trust. Read more and subscribe at ft.com.
Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bound. On today's programme, we're exploring the brand new Goodwood Art Foundation that opened in West Sussex last week with an inaugural show by the ever-excellent British artist Rachel Whiteread. The foundation comprises a new art gallery, reconditioned buildings for site-specific works, sculpture dotted through a 70-acre landscape of woods, glades and fields, education facilities and, naturally, an excellent cafe. It's all beautifully designed and seems very much of a piece with the historic Goodwood estate, which has always possessed a more subtle take on the stately. It's all about wonderful art and great ideas thoughtfully curated in a beautiful natural environment. And whatever isn't entirely natural has been tenderly cajoled and landscaped by the great garden designer Dan Pearson and his team. In this programme, I'm going to speak to the Duke of Richmond, whose Goodwood estate it is, the curator Ann Gallagher and the artist Rachel Whiteread on how they all work together to make this a real and metaphorical landmark of a place. So stay tuned, because that's all coming up right here on today's Monocle on Culture. Ann Gallagher is something of a star curator. She's formerly Director of Collections of British Art at Tate, where she's also curated shows by Damien Hirst and Susan Hiller, as well as the Brazilian artist Helio Oiticica and Rachel Whiteread. A work by the former will be installed soon at Goodwood, while the latter's work is, as discussed, the opening show. Ann's also curated the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale for Mark Wallinger and, yes, for Rachel Whiteread, as well as many other shows with other artists for collections across the world. Here's Ann Gallagher on her vision for the Goodwood Art Foundation.
It was a fantastic opportunity to be able to start from scratch, in that we had a landscape that Dan Pearson was going to entirely redesign, naturally, a very natural sort of aesthetic. And there were existing buildings that we could create into climate-controlled galleries so that we could borrow any sort of art. And so that we then did a lot of research about what this art foundation could be. And we found it could be much more than a sculpture park, and it could be more dominantly a balance between landscape and art. So for the visitor, we thought an experience of the landscape itself could be the sole focus if they wanted to, and then they would hopefully encounter works of art and be intrigued by them. And for those who know more about art, there are galleries with dedicated exhibitions and then beautifully situated works by artists in the landscape. Sculpture, yes, installation, sound, we'll have performance. We've got film in one of the exhibition spaces. So different mediums, different experiences, all with some relationship to the surroundings, either to the natural environment, to the actual vegetation, or to the history of the Goodwood estate itself.
And we've walked round. I'd love to ask you about the rhythm that you wanted to create with the spacing of the artworks, because it feels we're obviously in the natural environment, none more so. It's beautiful in this part of the world, and the spacing and the pacing of the artworks seems sparing and patient. It's a good workout, I'd say, yes, at Goodwood. So maybe you can tell us about the pacing that you want to offer.
Yes, we have 70 acres and quite a few different kinds of landscapes, from ancient woodland to wildflower meadows, a chalk quarry, all sorts of different types of areas that art might be shown. And we involved the artists very closely in where they wanted their work to be shown. But I think in our research sort of began with the principle that we didn't really want an overcrowding of art. We wanted everybody to be able to enjoy one artwork at a time. So I think whenever you're with one work, you can't necessarily see any other one. So you see landscape and then one work of art. And so you can devote your attention to that work of art. And you can also enjoy the landscape features and not be looking at your map desperately trying to find the next work of art.
Yeah, it feels like that. There's a sort of patience to it. And I don't know, as a curator yourself, what you feel about this, but there is sometimes that you feel that the temptation to cram a lot of things onto a wall, into a space, to make the most of a collection or stuff that's on loan. This feels like there's a lot of air to breathe, and the artworks are allowed to breathe that air as well. Is there a kind of golden ratio that you've struck as a curator, Anne?
Well, I mean, I think we've done the same inside the galleries. We kept it simple, sort of one work in each room. In the main exhibition space, we've got a large group of photographs on the walls. But really, we want everything to breathe. And, the other issue is we're just beginning. We have further plans for future buildings and future landscape features. There'll be other opportunities for different kinds of art. We have this summer the next opening of an installation by the Brazilian artist Eliotto Sica. So this is just the first stage. Things will continue, and in a way the opening programme sort of signifies how we will proceed in the future with a sort of format of one single exhibition by a high profile artist and lots of other wonderful international artists in other areas of the foundation.
I guess the headline artist for this inaugural show is Rachel Whiteread, with whom I know you've worked many times before on the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and I'm sure as Director of Collections at Tate, in many different ways. What was the conversation that you two had around kicking off the Goodwood Art Foundation? Which works, how did you choose which works to bring to commission and make for this space? I'm right in thinking, aren't I? Yeah.
Yeah, there's one work in the landscape that's never been shown before. It's just been made. But initially my thought was that Rachel, having been associated with a very urban landscape, has in recent years, been more interested in situating her sculpture in more remote settings. And that seemed to lend itself to this Goodwood Art Foundation project. I had always wanted to do more with her photography that she hadn't really shown. And I thought it was really important that this foundation was able to show from the outset work in different mediums. And therefore that combination, do you think we could look at selecting from the thousands and thousands of photographs that you've made a really nice group that would sit in dialogue with your sculpture within the gallery and extend into the landscape? So it evolved as a conversation, and as it did with all the other artists shown, some impetus to show their work in a setting such as this already existed, and so it was a great dialogue. Or, as in the case of Amy Siegel, she'd already filmed at Goodwood, and the subject matter she was dealing with was so pertinent to this foundation.
On Amy Siegel, you said you made some remarks when we walked into that gallery and watched that film. And I'd love you to maybe offer a recap, because it is such a fascinating subject, so specific, site-specific to Goodwood.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful film, Bloodlines, made in 2022, and obviously part of it was made during the COVID period. But she did a huge amount of research going through where Stubbs paintings existed. A lot of the ones that were still in private collections were with the families that originally had commissioned them in the 18th century, as is the case with Goodwood, where the Dukes of Richmond at the time commissioned some of his first works and he made them on the estate. She then followed the movement of all these works, both from private locations and museum storage areas, being packed into crates and then being moved and unpacked and shown in an exhibition of Stubbs' work at the Milton Keynes Gallery. It's a sort of side that you don't usually see when you're looking at art, the behind-the-scenes stuff of art handling, which is in itself very fascinating. And then as the works are put on the wall in the exhibition, and people look at the complete exhibition, and then them being repacked again and taken away. So it's a really subtle, amazing study of, image making, because she's very concerned with and interested in Stubbs himself, and she's showing prints that focus on the clouds in his paintings. So cloud studies taken from one-to-one images of his paintings, but also issues of cultural ownership, how art moves around. For a film that lasts 80 minutes, I've not seen so many people totally intrigued to watch as much as possible.
To the artist herself, Rachel Whiteread is probably best known for her sculptures that have reshaped ideas of form and material, especially in the casting of ordinary objects and inverting them and their status in the world and in the mind's eye, where rooms, garden sheds or bookcases become ghosts of themselves. Rachel won the Turner Prize in 1993, the same year that her work House, a cast of the inside of just that, stopped traffic in Bethnal Green and became an icon of young British art. Her Holocaust memorial from 2000 resembles a giant transposed library and is permanently on show in Vienna. New and old sculptural work were on show at Goodwood, as well as a fascinating collection of her photography. I began by asking Rachel how it feels to walk around and see her work in this specific context.
I do have works that are permanently installed outside, but not so many, and they're very much a sort of worldwide thing, so I don't see them very often. So to have this set up, we'll have Down and Up, which is the new piece, which is cast from a staircase and is in concrete. And it's a very sort of monumental presence, a bit like a kind of bunker that's come out of the ground or is going into the ground. And it sort of plays on brutalness of the piece and the bucolic landscape. And it's kind of nice to have those things where you're looking at a sculpture, but you've also either got the rain or the sun or the wind and the birds singing. And then you walk a little further on and you hear Susan Phillips' piece. And there's so many things, I think, about having work in the landscape that's a very, very different experience to looking at something that has white walls around it.
Yeah. It seems like there's ritual and sacrament and simply journeying to be done to see some of your works. Is that becoming a new interest, or is it a rekindled interest for you, the placement where they live?
I mean, it really, something happened after making House and the Holocaust Memorial, and it was really about not wanting to be me personally being in the public eye so much and having to sort of deal with things that were just not I didn't feel like that they were kind of necessary for me to have to deal with. So I started making works that I call shy sculptures, which are, a lot of them are buildings that are, small forgotten buildings, but are in the kind of middle of nowhere somewhere. So there's a boathouse in Norway, there are two shacks in Joshua Tree out in the desert in California. There's a piece on Governor's Island in New York, and there are various other works that are around the world, which are, it's really about the journey, getting to them as much as it is seeing the work, and so it's really about, it's an experiential thing.
Yeah, it's wonderful stuff, and it's affecting stuff, and the reward is the work. And I guess the experience is part of the artwork in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're not easy places to get to. I mean, there's one, the most recent one that I made was in a place called Kunosaki, way down south in Japan, in this very unremarkable town, and it's beautiful. I went there last year. It was made during COVID. Yeah, it's a very special place.
And you're, for the inside bit of the foundation here, the inside and the outside, the inside is you're showing your photography. Is this the first time you've shown it in a gallery context-ish?
I have shown bits and pieces in the past. This is the first time I've shown a large group of work. And, it's been beautifully printed and works alongside an earlier piece I made called Doppelganger. And the two things sit very well together in that there's a sort of permanence and colour about the photographs, and they're flat, two-dimensional things on the wall, and they're all the same size, whereas the Doppelganger is this very kind of ephemeral piece that looks like you could sneeze and it would all fall down, and that's been made from found materials, which I made during COVID, and it was then painted and then recently taken out of this boxes and painted again. So it has this feeling of very chalky texture. It feels a bit like plaster. And then there are another group of works in the back gallery, which is this very beautiful space. Feels a bit like a chapel to me, a very sort of brutal chapel concrete room. And then there are these pieces which are made in stone, which were originally part of a memorial that I made about COVID in Bergamo, which is where the virus first sort of really hit the European countries, and it sort of devastated the place.
And that's casts of the bases of chairs?
It's all made in stone, and the stone was all taken from the surrounding area, from quarries from the surrounding area, the original piece was shown in a medieval building, and the stone was reflecting the architecture of the building. So, yeah, and the stone was all given away by the community, and there was this incredible community spirit about making the piece happen. So it was it's a very emotional piece.
And it feels like a fitting place for it to live here, as you say, in that sort of, maybe it's an accidental space, but it does have a sort of, I don't know to use the word perhaps wrongly, but a sacred texture, sacred vibe to it as you walk through the main gallery space into that. And as we said, just finally back on your photography, Rachel, you are, I guess, like every artist, it's a form of note-taking. As I say, these are beautifully reproduced and all the rest of it. So you're finding patterns in things, there is note-taking, there is serendipity. What else is going on in the work? It's stunning stuff. This rewards a lot of re-looking at.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, as you say, it's a notebook. It's like, I always think it's like a sketchbook. I have my sketchbooks and I have my camera. And these are the two things that I always bring back into the studio and sort of check and look at. And if I get really stuck, I'll go back and look at them again, or scroll through lots of photographs. And, it's about trying to just, jog your mind into creativity or imagining things that you didn't quite imagine before. And so much of that stuff is serendipitous. In the street, walk out the door and take a photograph of someone, and the person I'm with is kind of looking around, what on earth are you looking at? And, I always see these very sort of odd moments. And I think it's partly about training your eye. And there's a wonderful article called Richard Wentworth, who this slide talk that every art student of my age saw, which was called Making Do and Getting By. And that was a sort of lesson in how to look at the world in a slightly kind of quirky way. And, he was always very influential in the way I took photographs at the beginning, but obviously now it's become very much my own thing.
Yeah, and it is that. It's the artist's eye of finding. I think one of your pictures is, it's a snake-like hosepipe on a terracotta floor, and of course it's like, yeah, no one else would have done that. It's wonderful, it is beautiful. And as I say, the finding of patterns, the finding of meaning in patterns, repetition, shapes in nature, shapes made by people.
Also the colour composition, it's the detritus of the world, it's all the crap we find on the street, the stuff that gets left behind. I live in Camden, and Camden's not like many boroughs. I always live in boroughs that are kind of a bit dirty and messy, and I like that. I think for me it's part of my. I don't like tidy places, and there's two or three particular areas that I walk past most days and have taken so many photographs, and it's just people just putting junk in the street, and they just sort of carry it out their houses, and they can't be bothered to phone the council, so it all goes in this place. And it's kind of wonderful how it just every day there's something else there, and it's
one man's muck.
Yeah, exactly. One man's muck is another woman's treasure. Yeah.
So let's now hear from the Duke of Richmond, whose stewardship of his Goodwood estate has been lauded for its creativity, sense of occasion and cool, and importantly, sense of fun. The Goodwood races on the beautiful Downland course have long been a part of the summer season. The Festival of Speed is a stunning way to breathe new life into the historic motor racing circuit. And events like Good Woof, a kind of dog show with a title, is a cheeky masterstroke. Goodwood House itself has a great collection of Van Dycks, Stubbs and Canalettos, so I asked His Grace what his ambition is for the more contemporary world of the Goodwood Art Foundation.
We're very, very keen to present contemporary art at the highest level, number one. It's all about bringing together, the foundation really focuses on the three pillars of art, environment and education. So we're keen to do it at the highest possible level, but make it, I guess, if we can, useful to the people who are going to get the most out of it, where it's most useful. So the idea is that the foundation should foster mental and physical well-being, creativity, all-round learning for people of all ages, abilities and backgrounds through engagement with art and connectedness to nature. So we hope we can sort of bring it all together. And we're not just focused on sculpture, we're focused on performance, we're focused on works on paper, we've got galleries, it's the whole shebang.
Yeah, there's lots of strings to the Goodwood bow. I mean, obviously, as much as also the racing, all the beautiful nature, the motor circuit, all the rest of it. This is another amazing appendage to it. You obviously grew up in a house with an august art history as well. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about some of the things you remember peering down at you, or you peering down at a young age, growing up in Goodwood House and elsewhere.
Well, I didn't move there till I was 12.
Perfect time to remember things then.
Didn't move there till we were 12. And the house is, well, we're lucky actually, the house is very easy to live in. So there's a sort of domestic part of the house, always been that part, that wing, and then there's the sort of state side of the house. But actually, funny enough, the thing I remember most is that my grandparents used to live in Grosvenor House, used to live there were flats in the hotel in the 1960s. And they lived there when they were in London. And I can remember the eve of my 8th birthday, I was asleep in flat 90 Grosvenor House. And the lovely stubs we have of the lion and the lioness was above my bed. And I was absolutely terrified.
This is a snarling lion, right?
I didn't sleep a wink, and I struggled the next day a bit. And my grandmother gave me a very, very nice silk shirt, which as an 8-year-old I was very, very pleased with. Made me feel, like very grown up. Yeah, so that was an early memory of the finest paintings giving me hell.
We didn't realise Stubbs had a spooky side, but
it's got that lioness coming out of the. It's got the lion sort of. It's slightly weird, but he sort of comes out of the dark in it. But and I remember well my grandfather. The Canalettos used to hang in the hall actually, in those days at the back on the back wall of the hall. And we moved them to where we think they really were originally. But and I remember him always telling me about how special they were, and what London was like then. The fact that St Paul's was the tallest building in London then, and the glory of that position on the Thames. And funny enough, I was just talking to Chris Bryant, the minister, absolutely about that, because they've been looking at Richmond House, which is where it is, Richmond House on the Thames, as a possible alternative house, one of the outposts for the Houses of Parliament when they have to shut it down. But it's a brutalist building. It's a very hard building to do anything with, and it's also a listed brutalist building. So he says it's impossible. They can't touch it, and I think they'd like to knock it all down probably. But anyway,
bon chance to them, right?
Sadly, we don't have it anymore. But we went a long time ago. Burnt down. Yeah.
And now to come bang up to date, you're now working with and commissioning living artists, doing amazing things here at the foundation. That's obviously an amazing pleasure, and I guess you'd call it a privilege to a certain extent. What kind of feel did you want to get? Who did you want to work with? You're obviously working with Rachel Whiteread on this inaugural show, amazing artist. But I wonder what sort of feel you wanted to give to the place.
Well, Ann's our curator, so we're very connected and focused on what she wants how she sees it. We're also, I guess to an extent where everyone's involved, so there's a team. But I think, as I said just now, we want to present contemporary art at the highest level. So even if people don't get it, we want them to know that they're seeing the best in the world. So, and I think Anne has very good access to these sort of artists. But we want artists who are at the top of their game, but they're not necessarily sort of, they're not cult figures.
And seeing Rachel Whiteread's work in this context, I know that she's moved her very urban pieces more and more into the countryside. There's a bit of a ritual, there's almost a sacrament to getting to some of them, and that's very much the case with some of the works that we're seeing here at Goodwood. You happen upon them. They're beautifully taken out of the context in which they're ordinarily seen. And I wonder if it's possible for you to surprise yourself walking around this place. Help plan it, it's on your land, all the rest of it. Is it still possible to be surprised when you've seen under the bonnet of a production like this?
I think lots, because we're so used to seeing this in a different way. So actually it's all come to, as with all these things, it's
like blueprints.
It's all been quite last minute too, in a way. Not so much the positioning of the sculpture, finally, that was in a few weeks ago, but I actually haven't spent a huge amount of time walking around because there's just been so much happening. But so even today when we walk around, experience the sound installation properly, and to see Rachel's piece just kind of tucked away in the woods somewhere where you might happen upon it if you happen to head off in the right direction. I think that's all. You can just have a walk really and not see anything.
And for you, I mean, so familiar with the grounds here, everything from all the attributes that the estate has. It's kind of must be nice for you, Your Grace, to have kind of moments where you do get surprised, because you know it like the back of your hand, I'm sure, despite its size, so much time spent here. To see the land used in this fresh context must be satisfying, a bit challenging. Yeah, you can tell me. I wonder what that's like to re-imbue it with a different type of life.
Well, I think it's exciting because obviously it's Anne's show really, as well. So it's not. So I haven't been that.
I'm not accusing you of curating all of it.
In that sense, I haven't really been involved with it in a way. So that is nice, and it's nice. As we all know, it's very nice to be surprised by something done well. So it's nice to walk around and go, "Wow, this is good," and this is great. Rather than be disappointed by things, which is often the way. So it is, and it's obviously this ground hasn't. It's a new way of treating the space. It's much bigger than it was before, and. I think the way she's laid it out is, it's all very much, and Dan's landscape too. It's very natural. Dan's approach is very naturalistic. It doesn't really look like it's been done. Obviously, it's early days. It needs 5 years to grow, and I don't think that the art and the landscape doesn't feel like some sculpture and landscape can be quite obvious and okay, well there it is. It's
plonked.
This is not a stately home with art around it. This is a thing in its own right. This is a very particular, special environment. It sits within this wall, extraordinary wall, actually, which was built by Napoleonic prisoners of war. Beautiful, beautiful flint walls, all sits within this. So it's a very particular. It happens to be at Goodwood, but it doesn't relate to the house in any way or anything like that, which I think it's not a good or a bad thing, but it just makes it a bit different.
That was the Duke of Richmond, and that is it for this week. My thanks to His Grace, as well as to Ann Gallagher and Rachel Whiteread. Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, and Steph also edits the show. Many thanks to Hunter Wang for his editing help with this episode. We'll be back at the same time next week, but until then, from me, Robert Bound, thank you for tuning in.
What does culture say about the way we live and how we could live better? Join Monocle in Barcelona this September for our annual Quality of Life conference. From bold new voices in media, design and the arts to lively debates on diplomacy, design and urbanism, it's 3 days of fresh thinking and creative exchange. Find out more and book your seat at monocle.com/conference.